Men barely understand themselves, yet they still believe they can understand women. What if the woman you're chasing was never real? Not in the literal sense, but in the way you see her, the way your heart races when she smiles, the way your mind builds a story around her laughter, her kindness, her presence. What if everything you felt was not about her, but about something broken, untrained, and unfinished within you? Thousands of years ago, long before dating coaches, self-help books, or Instagram influencers, a man named Plato stared into the soul of humanity and warned us. He told us of a cave, of prisoners who spent their entire lives staring at shadows on a wall, believing them to be truth. And when someone tried to show them reality, they fought, resisted, and clung to their illusions. Today, that cave still exists, but it's not made of stone and chains. It's made of projections, fantasies, and romantic myths. The shadows are not political or social, they're emotional. They take the shape of a woman you've idealized. A woman who, whether she knows it or not, becomes the mirror of your own unconscious slavery. And unless you dare to turn your head toward the light, toward truth, you'll never see her clearly. And worse, you'll never truly see yourself. Most men walk through life believing they understand women. They analyze her words, her moods, her patterns. They seek to decode her affection, her silence, her withdrawal. But the tragic irony is this: a man cannot understand a woman if he has never dared to understand himself. And most haven't, not truly. They've memorized how to attract, how to please, how to perform, but not how to see themselves. Not how to confront the shadow lurking within, the fear of being unloved, the hunger to be chosen, the desperation to be seen. This is why Plato's warning still matters. He never claimed to be a relationship guru. He wasn't writing for men who wanted to win her back. Plato was after something far more dangerous: the ignorance inside the soul of man. He knew that before man ever bowed to the beauty of a woman, he had already surrendered to something more seductive: his own illusions. He had already been conquered by the lies he tells himself about what love is, what women are, and most of all, what he believes will finally make him whole. You see, no woman can enslave a man who has mastered his own mind. But a man who remains blind to his inner chaos will always mistake attention for love, validation for destiny, and affection for salvation. And so he chases not the woman, but the part of himself he lost somewhere along the way. He thinks she holds the missing piece, but she never did. That's why men suffer most in love, not because of her actions, but because of their refusal to examine their motives. They are chasing mirrors, not people. And until a man has the courage to sit with his confusion, to face the noise in his own soul, he will continue to project fantasies onto women and call them truth. And that, my friend, is the first betrayal, not of her, but of himself. Plato's allegory of the cave wasn't just a commentary on politics or philosophy. It was a warning for every man who confuses illusion for reality. In his story, prisoners are chained in a dark cave, their heads fixed in place, forced to watch shadows dancing on a wall. These shadows are not real. They're merely projections cast by objects behind them, manipulated by others. But to the prisoners, the shadows are all they've ever known. So they believe in them. They name them. They build meaning around them. And when one man breaks free and sees the truth beyond the cave, he's blinded by the light, terrified. But eventually he begins to see things as they are. Now ask yourself, how different is that from how most men experience love? You sit in your own emotional cave, staring at shadows, fantasies of who you think she is. She smiles, and you see a soulmate. She laughs, and you hear destiny. But what if she's just a shadow on the wall, not a lie, not malicious, just not real? an image painted by your own mind, by your own longing. And when someone tells you the truth that you've projected a fantasy onto her, you resist. You defend her. You call it love. But Plato would say, you're not loving her. You're loving the illusion, the shadow, the story you've invented. This is why so many men feel crushed when things fall apart. It's not the woman leaving that destroys them. It's the collapse of the ideal they worshipped. The projection dies, and with it, the version of themselves they had anchored to her. Plato's allegory isn't just about truth versus lies. It's about liberation versus slavery. Until you turn your head, stand up, and face the painful light of self-awareness, you will keep mistaking emotional shadows for sacred truths. And that is how men stay prisoners in love, in life, and in the dark. A woman smiles, and he calls it love. She weeps, and he calls it vulnerability. She touches his hand, and he calls it fate. But none of these things are necessarily true. They are interpretations, not realities. They are meanings forged not by her actions but by his projections. Most men do not fall in love with women, they fall in love with the reflection of their own desire, with the story they're starving to believe. And so they read poetry into silence, sincerity into convenience, and destiny into mere coincidence. This is why love can feel so intoxicating and why heartbreak feels like death. Because the woman wasn't just someone he cared about, she was the embodiment of an unconscious narrative, a fantasy sculpted from loneliness, hope, and hidden wounds. She was never just herself, she became the resolution to every doubt he never faced, the redemption of every moment he felt unseen, unwanted, unloved. But here's the painful truth, she never agreed to play that role. She was never the cure, only the canvas. Plato understood this well. He wrote that the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. Yet, how many men define a woman based on how she makes them feel rather than who she truly is? Emotion becomes mistaken for evidence. Infatuation becomes confused with depth. And worst of all, men believe their inner narrative is objective truth. But it isn't. It's a dream built atop emotional hunger, wrapped in projections, and fueled by the desperation to escape inner emptiness. And when the dream collapses, when she pulls away, when she disappoints, when she turns out to be human, it isn't just the relationship that ends. It's the myth, the fantasy, the lie he built to shield himself from himself. And in that moment, he doesn't just mourn her, he mourns the loss of his own illusion. Until a man separates truth from projection, he will never love a woman, only the idea of her. And that idea, no matter how beautiful, will always betray him. The modern man is quick to accuse, quick to blame. He says, women are manipulative, deceptive, calculating, that they lead men on play games and break hearts without remorse. But the truth, the deeper, darker, more confronting truth, is that most women don't need to manipulate you at all, because you've already done the work for them. You've built the illusion, you've projected the fantasy, you've handed her the script, and she, knowingly or not, plays the role your unconscious mind demands. You see, a woman is not your enemy. She is your mirror. She reflects your lack of discipline, your unresolved longing, your emotional dependency. If you feel powerless in her presence, it is not because she took your power, it's because you never learned to hold it in the first place. If her attention feels like oxygen, that is not her fault. That is the signal of a soul that has forgotten how to breathe on its own. Men love to talk about being played. But how can she play you if you already gave her the board, the rules? And your king Plato wrote that the worst kind of deception is self-deception. And that's exactly what this is. You tell yourself she's the problem, because it's easier than facing the truth that you made her into something she never asked to be. You crowned her queen of your meaning. You allowed her validation to define your worth. And in doing so, you handed her the very power you now resent her for holding. A strong woman doesn't destroy a strong man. But even an ordinary woman can dismantle a man who has not yet met himself. She doesn't need to lie. She doesn't need to seduce. She only needs to exist in your mind as the one, and the fantasy will do the rest. Because where there is untrained desire, there is always voluntary submission. And the most dangerous prison is the one you walk into smiling. Plato believed the human soul was not a single, unified force, but a divided battlefield. In his chariot allegory, the soul is a driver attempting to steer two horses, one noble and disciplined, the other wild and chaotic. The noble horse represents reason, honor, and the pursuit of truth. The wild horse craves pleasure, validation, beauty. In between them sits the man caught in a constant war within himself. This wasn't just a poetic metaphor, it was a brutal diagnosis. Plato was telling us if you don't train your soul, your appetites will ride you into destruction. Nowhere is this more visible than in how men respond to women. She walks into the room and his posture changes. She laughs, and suddenly, he feels alive. She shows interest and he abandons his path, his mission, his values, all for a chance at pleasure, a taste of affection, a fleeting sense of worth. This isn't love. This is surrender. This is the wild horse pulling the chariot while the driver sleeps. Most men are not ruled by reason. They are ruled by appetite, by unchecked cravings for intimacy, attention, and emotional reward. And when those cravings dominate, the man cannot see clearly. He doesn't ask whether she aligns with his values. He doesn't ask whether she respects his mission. All he knows is that he wants, and so he chases, he sacrifices, he collapses. Plato's warning is sharp. A soul governed by appetite is not a free soul. It is a prisoner dressed in passion, a king who abdicates his throne for the approval of a woman who may not even see his worth. This is why men fall, not because she was powerful, but because he was undisciplined, because the wild horse was never tamed, because he mistook desire for destiny. Until a man learns to master the forces within him, he will always confuse hunger for love, and the ride will always end in ruin. There is no betrayal more devastating than the betrayal of the self. Yet countless men commit this quiet treason every day, not with malicious intent, but with romantic justification. They tell themselves they're being loving, supportive, selfless. They say they're compromising for the sake of harmony or sacrificing for the greater good of the relationship. But underneath those noble-sounding excuses lies something far more dangerous, a surrender of personal truth in exchange for her approval. You silence your instincts when they warn you she's not aligned. You bend your boundaries when she disrespects them. You alter your mission, delay your goals, reshape your values, not because you've evolved, but because you fear losing her. And in doing so, you abandon the very man you were becoming. Plato understood that no society can survive if its leaders abandon principle for popularity. Likewise, no man can preserve his soul if he trades integrity for intimacy. Every time you suppress what you believe to please her, every time you perform instead of stand, every time you ask what does she want instead of what is true for me, you are not loving her. You are abandoning yourself at the altar of her comfort. And here's the cruel twist: she senses it. She may not always say it, but she feels the shift. The man who once stood firm becomes malleable. The man who once knew his path now waits for hers. And while she may enjoy the power in the short term, she will lose respect for you in the long run. Because deep down, every woman knows a man who betrays himself to keep her cannot be trusted to lead, to protect, or to build anything lasting. Plato's wisdom still echoes: the just man is ruled by reason, not emotion. He does not negotiate with desire. He does not bend to fear. And most importantly, he never trades truth for affection because he knows that real love begins only where self-respect is preserved. She doesn't have to plot. She doesn't have to manipulate. She doesn't even have to say much. Because if a man has already surrendered his self-mastery, she becomes the ruler by default. Not because she sees power, but because he gave it away willingly. This is the quiet tragedy of modern man. Not that women are too strong, but that men are too unsure of themselves. They approach relationships not from fullness, but from lack, from need, from fear. And when a man needs a woman more than he knows himself, she holds more than his heart, she holds his direction. In this dynamic, the woman becomes the center of his emotional universe. Her mood dictates his confidence. Her attention defines his worth. Her withdrawal sends him spiraling into anxiety. And so the man who once claimed to lead now chases. The man who once had vision now waits for cues. The man who once sought truth now seeks validation. Plato warned that when the soul is ungoverned, others will govern it. He wasn't just talking about kings or tyrants, he was talking about internal sovereignty. A man who lacks it will always be ruled by culture, by temptation, by fear, and yes, by the emotional gravitational pull of a woman who senses his need and subconsciously steps into command. It's not her fault. It's not about blame. She may not even want the role. But nature abhors a vacuum, and when a man abandons self-leadership, something will fill the space. Often it's her. And while she may enjoy that power briefly, it quickly becomes a burden, a weight she never asked to carry. Respect erodes, attraction dims, resentment brews. What many men call falling in love is actually falling out of alignment. And once you give away your center, you will orbit hers. You will dance for attention, bend for affection, and live in reaction instead of purpose. Real love cannot grow in that soil, because a man who does not rule himself can never truly offer something worth following. You don't have to look far to see the consequences of men surrendering their discipline. Just look around. Modern culture is drenched in images of men apologizing for having standards, bowing to emotional manipulation, and abandoning principle for the comfort of acceptance. The collapse isn't isolated to personal relationships, it has become a societal epidemic. As Plato warned, when men allow pleasure to rule over discipline, the foundation of civilization begins to rot. And that's exactly what we're witnessing. In politics, leaders pander, instead of lead, more concerned with approval than with truth. In education, boys are taught to suppress their assertiveness, to feel shame for their nature, to be agreeable rather than purposeful. In media, the strong man is either mocked, emasculated, or portrayed as a threat, while the emotionally dependent man is glorified as virtuous. But what lies beneath this cultural inversion is something even more troubling: a generation of men who no longer trust their own instincts, who no longer see self-mastery as noble, who have been conditioned to equate masculine restraint with repression and emotional indulgence with authenticity. They are taught to feel more, but never to lead better, to open up, but never to stand firm. And so they drift lost, reactive, and quietly enraged. This isn't evolution, it's erosion. Plato saw it centuries ago in Athens, the birthplace of reason falling into decay because its men chose comfort over courage, feeling over form, and spectacle over substance. He understood that a society built on appetite will always collapse under the weight of its own indulgence. And today, we are reliving that lesson, not in marble temples but in broken homes, in men who cannot hold a boundary, in fathers who disappear, in leaders who follow. A civilization cannot survive if its men do not rule themselves first, and neither can a relationship. Because when masculinity becomes afraid of its own strength, what's left is not peace, but permission for chaos. At the end of every illusion stands a mirror, not a woman, not a villain, not a goddess, but a mirror. And the question is no longer, why did she leave or why did she change? The real question is, what did I see in her that I refuse to face in myself? This is the final transformation that Plato alluded to, the moment a man stops asking women to save him to complete him or to define him. Instead, he begins to see her for what she truly is, a reflection, a living, breathing feedback loop for the parts of his soul he hasn't yet claimed. She's not your enemy, nor your savior. She is the mirror of your self-discipline, your strength, your clarity, or your lack thereof. When she tests your boundaries, she reveals whether you have any. When she withholds affection, she exposes your emotional dependence. When she challenges your beliefs, she unmasks whether they are rooted in truth or merely borrowed to impress. And every time you fold compromise or betray yourself to keep her, it isn't her power that breaks you, it's your own surrender. Plato warned that the greatest danger to the soul is not oppression from the outside, but disintegration from within. When you lose the thread of who you are, when you forget your mission, when you trade purpose for proximity, you're not just failing as a partner, you're abandoning the philosopher within you. But when you flip the script, when you stop looking at women as emotional gods or spiritual threats, you step into truth. You reclaim your axis. You realize that she was never the source of your pain or your power, only the revealer of it. And from that place, you don't need to dominate or detach. You simply see. You see her clearly. And more importantly, you finally see yourself. Not through the haze of fantasy, but through the lens of truth. And that is where real strength begins. In a world obsessed with external validation, fleeting romance, and emotional gratification, one of the most powerful lessons a man can learn is this: no one can enslave you if you have mastered yourself. The true danger in relationships isn't manipulation from others. It's the subtle internal betrayal of your own values, purpose, and identity. We are taught from a young age to chase affection, to seek approval, to make someone else our reason for living. But as Plato warned centuries ago, a man who cannot govern his own soul will always be governed by his desires, by society, or by the illusions he creates. The woman you idealize may not be the enemy. She may not even be aware of the emotional power you've given her. But when you make her the source of your happiness, your worth, or your future, you don't love her. You lose yourself. Real love doesn't ask you to fold. It doesn't require you to abandon your path. It invites you to stand strong, to be seen for who you are, not who you pretend to be. The application of this wisdom is simple, but profound. Build your life around purpose, not people. Cultivate your own inner strength, discipline, and clarity. Don't chase meaning through someone else's eyes. And when you choose to love as a whole man, not as a half soul looking to be completed. Because in the end, freedom isn't found in being chosen. It's found in choosing yourself and living with integrity no matter who walks into or out of your life.